I think there's a certain perceived perfection at some stage in English history. That's what motivates Anglophilia, a feeling that one missed out on something via being born far too late. An older painting which Kubrick considered very vital to inspiring the aesthetic of Barry Lyndon was William Hogarth's Country Dance. Go have a look at Country Dance. We can Google these artworks now, we don't need reference books anymore. Actually, considering many paintings aren't permitted to appear online for my own understanding, maybe we still could. Look at Country Dance. Is the feeling which would emanate from actually having participated in this scene actually plausible in the present day? No. Not because of the internet, not because of the atom bomb, and not even because of the combustion engine, the lack of electricity, the emphasis on outside, and interiors as shielded tombs with which the outside can be appreciated and sufficiently safely celebrated. And also, at this time, there may have been no better, worry-free, luxurious and leisurely life to live than that of the English aristocracy. Oh, France is nice too, but the island comfort of Britain, compared with the landlocked, inevitable insecurities of French self-defense, almost seems more paradisal. Plus the rugged yet manicured green, plain yet gothic and ghostly English natural landscapes and geography, Ireland as well, quite so. It just has a very deep and innate feeling of purpose and accomplishment when contrasted with the elaborate fashions and highly ornate, structured and intricate architectures and styles which defined an old English or European indulgence. Prosperity, greed, the sensation of filling the void as the organic fulfillment of one's potential. Indeed, no awareness that it might be considered the filling of an existential void. There is no way to capture today the magic of country dance. Britain's place in the world has never been the same since the Second World War, playing second fiddle to America, or third after the nuclear-powered Soviets. The northern isolation, the atmospheric residue, impossible to attain to the same degree within the United States or North America generally. Barry Lyndon reminds one how the physical culminations of history are not just replicable material circumstances, but evidence of psychologies, pathologies which are totally impossible to recreate, or even speculate upon, without the simulated portal of precise, meticulous productions, such as Kubrick's Barry Lyndon. Why Anglophilia, then? Well, because it seems so manicured, perfect, ordered, and right, and although I've speculated that a love of older England is really just a submerged or subtler love for money, wealth, and exuberance. Without the dough, none of that lavish English period piece/piece grandeur would be possible anyway. It is more that these things are all organic, natural, and part of one's lack of shame as an Englishman participating in the world. At this stage in history, indeed for a noteworthy stretch of human history, the British Isles would have been the safest, most comfortable, secure, and pleasurable place to live, if one had the sufficient wealth to survive, that is. Also, that this film is initially set during the decades prior to the Industrial Revolution and closes after its considered commencement, and yet tries still to avoid its enclosing engulfment via an isolated, enclosed, perpetual property in the more rural country region, is not insignificant. Post-Industrial Revolution, onward to the Victorian and Edwardian eras, it becomes a lot less easier to adorn the upper-class societal gentry of the English luxury block with the sentimental feelings, as once the machines begin to dominate the English economy, they too much resemble our own age, a similar dependence on machines, an abundance of smog within the cities, a disdain for the natural in lieu of the conquest of architecture, engineering, modern science. There's no way to present 19th century more urban, Britain to be portrayed in the manner that Barry Lyndon portrays it. None. So Barry Lyndon's Anglophilia, potentially the ultimate expression of that, is dependent on a certain historical period specificity. So is all Anglophilia therefore a pre-industrial plea to a more modern, simple, greener yet manicured garden party elegance, a society of tended grass and proposed equilibrium? So why would Anglophilia exist as anything except a more polite manifestation of a vague Luddite sentiment then? Well, Anglophilia persists to this day, maybe especially in my country, Australia, a proposed paradisal respite for the arrogantly vulgar, bullying, predatory, and manipulative, reptilian nature of many Australian men. These men who accuse women of playing mind games, that is total projection, I'm sorry. We think of old England, or even newer contemporary England, the UK, as a finer, more perfected element of English language society devoted to intellectualism, a certain proper, formal logic, politeness, and ordered categorization and classification. Many saw the purity and ambition of English popular music as far more interesting than the banal cash-ins and knockoffs abundant on the Australian continent, the history of literature far more experimental and spontaneous, conscious of a tradition yet aware of how to prospectively add to it, not too insecure and predictable and follow the rulesy like Australian literature has often been, quite regrettably. Australian culture is so much trying to do what the earlier, older English-speaking nations do, artistically at least, that the culture can sometimes lack an originality or audacity in our own creative compositions, contributions to the human or English language rather, canon. England is a more ordered, original, consistent and traditional, proud, older society, more sources of prides and passions than the knockoff, oh, we exist too, nature of Australia on the international stage. It is almost as if the reaction to English culture and our desire to not be like them, not snobby or prudish or proper, as if they actually are, which is amusing to consider, really, renders Australia culturally barren almost as an act of passive-aggressive resistance. Ew, we don't want to be like them. Let's tell jokes about the toilet, belittle anyone with a bit of an ambitious disposition. Let's try to essentially destroy anything that isn't openly crass, vulgar, and trying to impress the other boys or blokes, you know. I know there is a subculture of this in England. I can imagine many English or Scottish pointing out to me, "Oh, most people aren't very cultured here either, Mr. AOD. Yeah, you guys like your football, soccer a bit too much. You love your grog, Mrs. Brown's Boys and Little Britain and Balls of Steel before it were more popular shows than Peep Show or QI or Stuart Lee's Comedy Vehicle. I do know that." Yet in Australia, that is not just a loud, overly indignant, culturally, maybe not materially, subcultural, certain economic bracket. It is everyone, essentially, who is residing or spending time outside of a university campus, or maybe a library as well, possibly. And even the more pseudo-cultured, wealthier elite of Eastern or some of Northern Sydney, they only like high culture or fancy, audacious art because it is now, due to the age and status of the items, a very expensive, privileged, prestigious venue of contemporary culture. They like the lavish prices, not the spiritual enrichment. Barry Lyndon, it makes you put your Anglophilia in perspective. Me, I remain an Anglophile because as an Australian, I'm kind of annoyed with sunny days at this point. It's just like, again? Really? Another day? My God, enough already. Seriously, I know it sounds ungrateful, but with climate change cooking the planet, the sun is less and less enjoyable by the day. It just burns the skin, stings the eyes, heats the house. Not the most fun situation. Sorry to disappoint potential tourists or migrants, seriously. No Maurice Jarre score to make the sun any fun either, you know. I am the man who broke the bank at Monte Carlo. But that's quoting the film that best exemplified, perhaps, that English condition, you know. Kubrick's film, like I've said of Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility, is more perfect at communicating a more universal appeal of English aesthetics. The outsider, the Anglophiles England, aware of the fallibility, not too emotionally attached as they would be to their home, not bitter enough as they would or could be to their home, so lacking the bite of Lawrence Colonel Blimp or Terence Davies in general, but in admiration of that gorgeous, fascinating experiment in human philosophic and political history. The English experiment, the Parliament, the sciences, the order, the society, the economy, the most influential culture since the ancient Greeks and the Egyptians or Babylonians, Sumerians before that, for better or for worse, via violence or via admiration, the British have dominated the general genesis of this polarizing modern world now. And of course the ungrateful English are so close to it, consumed by it, convinced of its mundane ubiquity, for they consider it boring, plain, uninteresting, unfashionable, not as lavish as America or Australia. I almost get bitter when I see them having migrated to Australia. Opportunistic careerists wanted to leave the sinking ship. What a disgrace, man. Like a lot of J.G. Ballards, without any literary talent or as a originally wry sense of humour, maybe. Me, I'm the insecure, frightened of intellectual irrelevance or unoriginality Australian who wants to move to the UK to prove that I have it, but not to London, not to Glasgow, or even anywhere in Ireland. Maybe Innisfree, if it were real, with the utopian, vaguely socialist beauty of Ford's magnificent The Quiet Man, of course. But to, naturally, of course, Cornwall. I want to live in Brian Eno's Ambient 4. I want to live in the location which so moulded Richard David James, Aphex Twin. I'm so in love with Mark Jenkins' featured Bait as well now. It only emboldened my strange innate desire to settle, one day maybe, perhaps, in Cornwall, up there. Or down there, if you're from another part of England than Cornwall, I suppose. See, Anglophilia is more about the feeling of being a part of something more, something old, wiser, together with a coherent cultural history, a sense of pride, all things which Australia, mostly at least by comparison, appears to sorely lack. Whether it does or doesn't is debatable. The real point is, by comparison to the expansive tradition of the British Isles, it feels that way psychologically. All Australians want to leave Australia, everyone else wants to come and live in Australia. The human condition, its ironies, tragedies, insistence that the grass is always greener on over the other side of some hill, can be more summarized by being born in the world's retirement beach continent, Australia, and wanting to leave it, as everyone wants to settle here, very enthusiastically, more indicative of human malcontent and foibles than any tortuously irrelevant Sartre text, anything autocratically pushed by the grim, cosmically cynical B.F. Skinner, an episode of Hanna-Barbera's classic Yogi Bear, or just the contemporary climate of these indie aesthetic films in general. I hope Greta Gerwig loses all of her money and is then sad. Maybe not more indicative than Barry Lyndon, though, because if anyone ought to just shut up, sit down, and accept happiness to the frustration of the contemporary Anglophile, he won't. It is the film detailing the life of Barry Lyndon, directed by the very mighty Stanley Kubrick. That Barry is living in this time that so many Anglophiles seemingly envy, yet all he seemingly cares about is status, materials, and primal gratification. He cannot simply arise, smell those roses. Our reaction to this is in the apparently uglier, by some claimed comparison, industrial contemporary, is so beautifully frustrating, timeless, plausibly meta, a highly fascinating function of a film which distills the past not to glorify the past via frustrating the present, but to frustrate the present via depicting the shameless entitlement of the older English/British/Irish generations. The environment might have been nicer then, but people are always the same, and the corruption of the English landscape was not in a unison with the corruption of the English character, but something the landscape and aesthetic were relatively uncorrupted by in comparison, and so the people seemed more gentlemanly, proper, formal, and classier by comparison. This magnificent picture, far more useful than its impression as the most precise, careful of all period pieces, is a deconstruction of the romance behind period pieces in general, whilst fulfilling, embracing, and understanding the appeal of them. Though isn't that the most pleasantly predictable thing which Kubrick could have done with any subject, that being said?